Very good morning and a warm welcome to AIT Lanka, where we inspire love for learning, of course, with love and care, synergy, and lifelong learning. With our purpose of revolutionizing the education landscape, we have been seeding professionals in the field of IT, business, and law for a little over 2 decades. It is time for you to join us to get groomed under the well informed academics and professionals with the provision of best support systems to take the next step in your life. Our senior academic panel is here today to guide you in selecting the best study program that suits you as you have embarked on your interesting career and, of course, to go further in life. You can send in your questions today to us on our Q&A session. Since we are on this platform, you can, of course, send in all the other concerns that you have, not necessarily the academic components, but any other components covering financial support, the student support that we have at AIT Sri Lanka, so that we will be able to discuss all of this pertaining to the discussion today during the Q&A session. So having said that, let us now listen to Chairman Mr. Bandulai Godage to share his expressions and his wishes on behalf of AIT Lanka. So experience the excellence yourself and welcome to AIT Sri Lanka Virtual Postgraduate Open Day 2021. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushali. I wish you everybody for very pleasant Sunday morning. We gathered here for very worthy cause. So welcome all the prospective students for AIT Postgraduate Open Day, first of all. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our CEO, as usual, Mr. Roshan Egodege and Board of Directors, and also the student population and our lecturers and our staff, I would like to welcome all great panelists and all the students for this Sunday morning very energetic move. First of all, our guest speaker, Dr. Roger Levermore, not a stranger for us in any case, only for not for Sri Lanka. Also, he's not a stranger for Sri Lanka. He's the Dean of AIT Thailand. So he is here with us today to make the guest speech. So thank you very much in spite of your busy schedule. Whenever Dr. Rohant initiates these seminars for the benefit students, he always accepts our invitation without any doubt. So thank you very much for that acceptance, Dr. Roger. I'm sure very frequently we connected with you for many occasions recently. So the confidence, trust, and also the mutual friendship that we really appreciate what you have with us, especially for Sri Lanka as well as AIT. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Roger Levermore. Also, we have two more panelists, great panelists. No need any introduction for Sri Lankans, especially Dr. Nayana Dehigama, my quite old friend and chairman of EPIC Sri Lanka. He is also spending his Sunday morning for our postgraduate students. I mean, I request all my students to make use of him, get the maximum out of him, and send any number of the questions. Even if he doesn't have a time, I'm sure he will connect with you offline. So, but anyway, thank you, Dr. Nayana Dehigama, being with us today for the benefit of students. And the other gentleman, Dr. Anil Fernando, who represents Sri Jawadanapura University as the senior lecturer, he is also joining with us. He is also a great personality. He is also with the current existing students and very well respected personality. So as usual, Dr. Rohanta initiated this program, many sessions. I think we have harvested many things. People have valued and gone more one extra mile because of your initiative, Dr. Rohanta, and also the panel inputs. So as Kaushali mentioned, AIT known as a quality education. And in the meantime, we take our maximum effort when all students are leaving not as an academic excellence, not only as academic excellence, they are leaving as the leaders. So that is why people like you, people like your caliber, the leaders, we are bringing into AIT for students to understand the practicality of the value of the leadership. So therefore, without further ado, I would like to hand over it to Dr. Rohanta to go ahead with your valuable program. So once again, all the panelists, thank you very much for your time and the energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ranul, my right hand. Ranul, you would like to share? Ranul, I think the screen is not coming on. Shall we proceed and we can watch the video on AIT subsequently? Can I take this opportunity of introducing Dr. Roger? Professor Roger Levermore is the Dean of the Associate Professor for the Management Practice, Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. He was educated in the UK and South Africa and has taught and researched on a range of subjects, including leadership, strategy, ethics, and sports management. He has led MBA programs in the UK from 2005 to 2010 and in Hong Kong 2012 to 2019. Prior to joining AIT, Professor Levermore worked at Chinese University of Hong Kong 2018 to 2019 and Hong Kong University of Science and Technology 2012 to 2018. You could see, the kind of background he comes from, very strong academic plus the running strong leadership. And from the little research that I have done, being also a graduate of AIT, just like Naina and Dr. Anil, he has turned around the management school at AIT, and it just shows out on his profile on the kind of very challenging jobs that he has done. Dr. Roger, thank you very much for obliging to come on board. We are very, very interested to partner you and support you in terms of launching the doctorate program in Sri Lanka. And as graduates of AIT on the doctoral program, Dr. Naina and Dr. Anil and myself will support you, sir, in your venture in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Dr. Roger.
Okay, it's my pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Really keen to go through and talk to you today. So I'm going to share my slides in a few moments' time, but before I do so, I wanted to let you know that the theme that's been kind of selected today is a theme that is designed for people who are thinking about doing a DBA, or it's also a subject area which is taught on the best MBAs in the world. So the theme is scenario planning. It's a tool that's used by quite senior leaders in some of the largest companies around the world. And it's something which really appeals to people who have got some work experience. So when I've taught this over the last 7 years, and I'm going to be talking about it for 20 minutes, but to do it really well, the people that focus on scenario planning, when I teach it for 45 hours, because it's a simple idea, but to actually do it well takes a lot of time. And it's an ideal topic for DBA students to do for their thesis, because it does require a lot of time to go through and think through the application of scenario planning. It's also something which is not really appropriate for PhD study, because it's not theoretical, it's an applied tool. And you need to think about the kind of the implications of this tool for strategy and the way that the company might look in 10 years' time. So I'm going to share my slides with you now. It is a 20-minute presentation on this subject area, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. I know that the theme today is about MBA and DBA programs, and I do think that this subject area fits in pretty well between them. So scenario planning is that topic, and the photo that I'm showing there is of AIT main campus, which is 40 kilometers north of downtown Bangkok. And you've already heard my introduction. All I will say is that I first was exposed to scenario planning by a senior leader from Cathay Pacific when I met him in 2012. And I'd never heard of this before that particular time. I've been teaching MBA for 20 years. So in 2012, I've been teaching for around about 11 years on strategy and leadership. And I was surprised that I'd never read about it in any of the textbooks on strategy. And there's a fairly good reason for that, which I'll explore in a couple of slides' time. But since I was first kind of introduced to the theme of scenario planning by this as the senior leader, I realize it's quite an interesting secret within business and within some of the top MBA programs, that it is a tool that is used by those leaders, and it is gaining in interest since 2012. And now I actually include it in most of my teaching, no matter what I teach. That could be strategy, that could be leadership, that could be sports management, but I find it a very useful applied tool. And even the students with little work experience on the MBA, if they're open-minded and curious, they also find this particular tool something which is of great benefit to them. In fact, in the last 10 years or the last 9 years, the people that have gone from the MBA at institutions like HKUST, when they applied for some strategy positions, when they spoke about scenario planning and they gave the names of the companies that are using it, the people who interviewed them that knew about scenario planning, this was something which kind of made them distinguished when other people in the interviews did not talk about scenario planning. Okay, so I think it's something that MBA students, when they go through and understand this and they can apply it, it gives them a head start and an advantage during the interview panel. I also teach this with a colleague who used to do scenario planning at a company called Shell. We do corporate training sessions for companies like Cathay Pacific, like MTR, which is a large railway company, infrastructure company in Hong Kong. So we go through and do 1 or 2 day sessions with them. And I'll give you some 2 examples today about how to do this in practice, how to run a session on scenario planning. Before that, I'll explain what scenario planning is. Okay, so this term, scenario planning, these are the type of companies which have put this strategic tool on the map. It really started in the 1970s with Shell. They had a team that fed into the strategy of Shell, which was looking at 1980, 1990, and 2000. And there was a gentleman called Pierre Wack that was part of that team that really developed this. And the disciples of that particular team spread around the world, because there were 200 or 300 people working in the 1970s and 1980s on this particular theme. And they went to work for other big companies. Today, it's used a lot within telecommunications, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of those companies on this slide. But 1970s, Shell was the company that really worked on this, and they credited their success in the 1980s, 1990s because of this particular tool. Elon Musk is a big fan of this. So if we're talking about the world now, he uses this in his thinking. Every month he has a scenario planning session with his team, but other people in associated industries. Facebook is known to use this. Swire Company, which is the parent company of Cathay Pacific, they're the ones that actually introduced it to me in 2012. Huawei has a team of 40 people that work on scenario planning, and I know the head of that team very well. We actually work together in some of the classes where we teach this to our MBA and other students. Lego. So Lego is a very interesting company that realized about 25 years ago that their business model was compromised. they couldn't see how people were going to go through and buy plastic building blocks to go through and sustain them for the future. So in the 1980s and early 1990s, they did scenario planning. And at the end of it, they realized they had to go and try to diversify into unlikely industries, such as the film industry, and also the way that Lego can be used in corporate training. So now Lego make more money through their movies and corporate training than they do from selling plastic building blocks. In the 1990s, the Singapore government also invested heavily in this particular tool, scenario planning, with a view to 2010, 2020, and 2030. And the turnaround in Singapore is credited partly by the use of scenario planning. 2 years ago, when Amazon was the largest company in the world, Jeff Bezos turned around and said, we are going to fail. We are not going to be a company in 20 or 30 years' time. Something unexpected is going to go through and present itself, and it's going to mean that it's the end of Amazon. So he has teams within Amazon who are trying to work out on the things that could sink them and how can they change their strategy to cope with those sometimes unforeseen developments. So it's something that Amazon is using. Even Philip Morris, the tobacco company, this was on their website 2 years ago. On the front page of the website, they were saying, we realize that there's going to be, that their business model is compromised and they have to find other ways to go through and change their business model. So they're working on a smoke-free future, and they use scenario planning to go through and get there. So one of the reasons that scenario planning is being used a lot at the moment is that it's popular during times of volatility or extreme volatility. The 1970s was a very volatile time, and Shell used it because they realized that on a yearly basis, there were things that were coming at them which were unexpected and somewhat unforeseen. So they used this particular tool during volatile times in particular. And this is something that came out a few years ago now, but the favorite tools for thinking about future developments, thinking about potentially unforeseen aspects within the world, scenario planning is used by almost 40% of those companies. And in 2018, when PwC asked their clients about the use of scenario planning, the response was that a large amount, 37% were using it more than the year before, and 15% were using it as something which they'd been doing for the first time. Despite that, you still have people and companies that do not use scenario planning, and that's partly because it's difficult to go through and look at the future and plan for it because the future is so uncertain. And it takes up a lot of time, resource, revenue to do this really well. And sometimes you get it wrong. So I'll talk about some of the downsides of scenario planning towards the end of this session. Interestingly, this is something which has come from practice. It's come from business. It has not come from academia. So if you pick up a book on strategy, a textbook on strategy, there might be 1 or 2 pages out of 400 pages that talk about scenario planning. And it is taught in some universities, some of the best MBA programs in the world. So when I come across executives that did an MBA that went to Harvard University, Harvard teaches scenario planning. Oxford University in the UK, they teach scenario planning. But when I was in the UK teaching at the University of Liverpool, never something that I heard. And I started to go through and teach this at HKUST, which is a top 20 global MBA program. And I don't believe it's being taught there after I've left. So it's something that comes from academia. And I was asked the question by a student from Kellogg who had done 7 strategy courses during the time he was an MBA student, saying, does this really exist? Because none of his research professors had ever mentioned scenario planning. So it forced me to work out how well known is this term. And I realized it's not something that's used in academia very often, but there were 1.45 million hits a year ago when I did this search on Google, and there was close to 600 books about scenario planning. And these are some of the books. This particular one here by Thomas Chermak is probably the easiest one to understand as a way to go through and provide a self-help guide to doing scenario planning. And in the 1970s, and Oxford University is doing a good job of this at the moment, the reason that scenario planning is there is that we have, as humans, we have these huge blind spots in our decision making, especially about thinking ahead. Two of those blind spots are things like availability bias, where we're influenced very heavily by what we see in front of us at the moment. And we project that ahead and imagine that the world will be changing in those ways. Okay. We also have a bias in optimism, that if you ask a sales team what the next year is going to look like, most of that team, 90% of that team, will say that the sales are likely to increase. This has been something which is scientifically proved time and time and time again, that most people go through and project upwards. Very rarely do they go through and say things will look worse in 12 months than those that say the opposite. So the example that Shell gave to say that scenario planning was useful and how poor people project ahead, especially experts, okay? So this isn't necessarily an attack on experts, but it's just to show that expert opinion should be questioned from time to time. So Shell in 1981, they asked 3 different expert consultants about how much oil-filled equipment was required for the next 10 years. Expert 1 said there needs to be a big increase. There will be a big increase. Expert 2 said a fairly significant increase. Expert 3 said there'd also be an increase. So what actually happened in that 10-year period was much very different to what the 3 experts were highlighting. So actually what happened here was very, very low, although for the first 6 months, it did increase. So when we look ahead, we have all sorts of problems associated with that. And it's partly because we don't go through and counter in unexpected developments, especially things which look fairly pessimistic, downward turns. So at the moment, a lot of strategy is based on short-term thinking, which is related to forecasting, quantitative forecasting. And The Economist in 2018 said that forecasting is good, but only good when it's very close to the current day. So they took a look at GDP forecasts, and some of those forecasts were from 1 or 2 years out. And they realized that the closer you get to the actual date, the more accurate, unsurprisingly, that prediction is going to be. But when it was 3 months away, 6 months away, a year away, the projections were a long way short of what actually happened. So as I mentioned at the start, I do a lot of work here with somebody who is an executive at Shell who worked in the scenario planning team. He's actually an adjunct faculty that works with me at the School of Management. And he points out when he teaches to the students and to the corporate training that we do, that 99% of organizations that look at forward planning, they go through and focus on existing circumstances. However, in 1% of cases, the most forward-looking companies such as Amazon, Facebook, Elon Musk, and others, they try to go through and think beyond existing circumstances. And they look at scenarios which are outside of their current thinking. So things which might not look relevant at the moment, but if they were to occur, plausibly to occur, it could go through and throw the strategy into some doubt. So these are the 6 basic steps of scenario planning. And although it's relatively simple to grasp what's required, to go through and do each of these stages can take a very long time. So even when I teach this across 45 hours to the MBA students, it's really not enough time to do scenario planning properly. which is why scenario planning is a particularly good thing for a DBA student that's got 3 years to focus on a subject area. This is why 3 years is a good amount of time for a DBA student who's in their late 30s, early 40s. At AIT, the average age of a DBA student is 43, and they're usually in a senior or middle management role. So these are the 6 stages that go into scenario planning. Number 1, it's a generally good understanding of how the company or industry operates. And although that sounds fairly simple, most people in organizations are focused just on their particular role, whatever that might be. It could be in marketing, in HR, in finance, and they don't necessarily see how the whole organization works. So understanding the revenue streams, the business model canvas, the cost structure, everything that goes into a company is in itself fairly revealing, but can take a long time to go through and get to that stage. So that's part number 1, is understanding the company. Number 2, it's understanding trends, macro trends, and driving forces. Okay, so this means going to the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the Financial Times, a range of indicator banks that go through and talk about projections for the next year, 2 years, 10 years down the line. So you have to go through and understand and identify trends and driving forces. And this is a very, very large job indeed. You've got companies like IBM that have built a huge supercomputer that go through and process those trends and driving forces. Some of them are very predictable, but the part of scenario planning is to try and pick up on the less predictable and how might that change the company if it were to occur. So this is what number 3 is. Step number 3 is about creating a scenario planning template where you pick up on a combination of some of those trends and driving forces, and you start thinking about how might this have an interplay or interface with parts of your organization? How might it impact customer or market behavior? How might this have an impact on the technology and innovation required for your organization? How does this change the competitive structure of the industry landscape? How might this impact on the demographics of the key people that you need to go through and purchase your goods? How might it change public opinion? Because if some of these trends lead to large-scale unemployment, such as big technology trends, automation, how will that impact public opinion? How will that impact the government? And then how will that impact the decision-making of your organization? So creating a scenario planning template is part 3. And part 3 and part 4 are the most complicated and difficult aspects to scenario planning. And it requires a lot of creativity to go through and get to stage 3 and stage 4. The best way of doing that, and I'll be showing you an example of how Rolls-Royce did this in 2016, you really need to have people with different perspectives. You have to have people who are creative, curious, and you have to avoid groupthink, right? So you tend to avoid the chief executive being involved in this stage because people in the team quite often are scared to go through and say things which they feel that their boss is going to disagree with. So you have to have people in an environment who are prepared to go through and speak up and voice things which might be deemed to be a little bit pessimistic or negative. You have to have a good team of people who can go through and be creative thinking in stage 3, stage 4. Then stage 5, you have to think about the impact of the specific scenarios which are created and look through the impact on strategy. And then stage 6 is about updating your strategies and planning accordingly for if those slightly unexpected events actually take place. And it's like a contingency plan. So you pick up on things which look a little bit outside the box, but if they occur, and you can tell they're about to occur based on 3 or 4 factors that could predate that particular scenario occurring, and then you have a contingency plan in place for if that unexpected likelihood actually occurs. So these are the 6 steps that tend to go into scenario planning. And so Pierre Wack, when he was asked to go through and explain scenario planning, he says that it's about alternative ways of understanding the future. It's not about an accurate prediction of the future, but what we do know in times of volatility is that the future it is unexpected. It's very rarely predictable, right? So we have to have a mindset, we have to have an openness to be prepared for contingency plans for when some of those alternatives take place. We can't go through and have a contingency plan for thousands of alternative scenarios, but if you have a collection of data that points in a particular direction, then this is something which is very important for this particular planning process. And a key feature of scenario planning is realizing that you have to be prepared for different potential scenarios, different potential outcomes. Okay, so having a 2x2 matrix like this to go through and think about, okay, so if scenario A happens, how does that impact on strategy and how does strategy need to change? The same thing for B, C, and D as well, right? Because the chance that scenario A might occur could be a 50% chance, but it's unlikely to be a 100% chance. So to be ready for scenario B, scenario C, scenario D is regarded by people that go through and believe in scenario planning as an important step forward. So let me come to the 2 examples, and these are very quick examples, and these will be the last part of my presentation today. So Rolls-Royce in 2016 did a scenario plan. Those of you not too familiar with Rolls-Royce, it's a 1906 company that was formed on producing quality premium cars. Rolls-Royce is no longer involved in automotive production. It's a large company, 14 billion pounds, 50,000 employees in 2016 when it went through this exercise. It now specializes in design, manufacturing, distribution of power systems for aviation and other industries. So even to get to that stage, they had to go through and do scenario planning to move from quality car production to other types of business model. During 2008, they avoided financial collapse, partly because of thinking ahead. But in 2014, they ran into financial difficulties. Share price dropped by 50%. So in 2015, a new chief executive turns up and he asked them to go through and do scenario planning, which happened in 2016. And this 6-point process took place with 25 mid and senior level executives from different divisions in Rolls-Royce. They had a 3-day workshop to go about this. And they begin by really getting a thorough understanding of how all parts of the organization link together. And then they look at potential driving forces or trends. So for them, this was the future of transportation, taking into account environmental concerns. And also they realized that things like migration patterns could have an impact on their company, which is a little bit more outside of the box. They then divided into 4 subgroups based on the 4 scenarios that they thought could impact Rolls-Royce in the next 20 years. And they went through and created the scenarios and the impacts on the strategy for Rolls-Royce at that particular time. They had to be plausible and relevant to the company's circumstances, and it did have a role to play in changing the company's strategies from 2016 onwards. Okay, so this was a key part of the 2016 strategy process, which has been written about in case studies, which is publicly available if you do a Google search. Okay, so that's Rolls-Royce. In July 2020, I worked with the person that I was talking about who worked at Shell. We went through and did a similar exercise over one day with senior executives at this particular organization. And we looked at, we divided it into, we wanted to start off by looking at potential trends, driving forces. So we went through and surveyed those people that joined, and there were around about 25 to 30 people that joined this particular session 12 months ago. And we asked them to think about probable driving forces, things that they thought were very likely to affect this particular company. So these were things like digitalization, AI, interconnectivity, new materials such as graphene that might challenge oil-based materials, the way that geopolitics is affecting the company, the likelihood of quantum computers, and how that could go through and change. These are regarded as the probable events that they didn't think about on a day-to-day basis, but could change the company. And then 5G as well. Okay, and then they wanted to prioritize those probable events and work out how might they impact different aspects of this particular organization. Okay, and they went through and then looked at the improbable events that could affect the organization. So this was based on things like increasing the sharing economy, could be about malnutrition affecting 50% of the global population. It could be the increase of medical reports linking Wi-Fi to cancer. 2040, biggest public health issue could be noise. Could be about the medical developments of blood tests estimating the life expectancy of employees. Okay, and then 55% of the global population living in water-stressed areas. So these are events which are not necessarily improbable, but they don't look too relevant to the day-to-day jobs of the people in the organization. However, if they were to occur, they could have long-lasting impacts to the business model and strategy of the company. And then again, we sat down and we looked at breakout room work. How might the probable and the less probable events impact the organization? If they came together, what would be the impact on the company? We did that with probable, improbable, and then coming up with contingency plans in place for if those type of events were to occur. So that was the kind of the shortcut way to doing the work within one day, but it is very difficult for people to take a step out for 1, 2, or 3 days from the day-to-day job and think about these particular issues. And this is one of the problems of scenario planning, is that it can look far-fetched. It's something which, if it hits the organization, it might happen in 10, 15, 20 years' time when some of these people have retired and they don't really feel that it's that important for them to go through and consider it. Other things, when I was talking to somebody when we went to South Africa and took people into different companies, we spoke to 2 different organizations about scenario planning. One is a coal-based company. And the first thing the chief executive said when he stood up is, okay, we are currently a coal-based company, but in 20 years' time, we're going to be in renewable energy and we're going to be in water instead. So the students said, why are you going to be doing that? And they said, because we do scenario planning on a regular basis. And we realized that coal mining is not going to be something which is going to provide us with money, with revenue in the future. So this is very likely to happen and we're going to change. So that was an easy thing for them to go through and look at, because all of the predictions are for coal mining to stop, become compromised, and therefore they can go through and invest in that and not look stupid. The second was a chief executive from a retail company who was looking into the impacts of things like malnutrition, climate change, and how that could impact the retail business. He was taught scenario planning at Harvard Business School, and he said that it's very difficult for him to convince his bosses in New York about making a strategic investment that might cost the company $500 million when it looks unlikely to happen. It's much easier to go through and invest $500 million in something which all the experts think is very likely to happen, rather than to go through and put it into something which is less likely to happen, because you look really stupid if you go through and try and convince the chief executive that that unlikely event could completely change the organization. So it's a hard one to go through and really sell at some levels. So these are the type of things that came out from some of the case studies that we had when we've taught scenario planning. I've been talking about this subject now for about 35 minutes. So it's difficult to go through and try and really explain what it is and how to do it, even in 45 hours, which is why for a DBA student to do this over 3 years, it's actually quite a useful exercise because it is applied. It's not theoretical. It's something which can benefit people to go through and do because it's a senior leadership skill. And lots of our DBA students are doing a DBA because they want to go through and be a senior director by the next 5 or 10 years. So to go through and grapple with scenario planning is one of the ways they can go through and do that. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me today. I'm going to stop sharing because I know that there's now going to be a panel session about DBA MBAs. So Dr. Rahanta, over to you, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roger. Actually, from the day that the pandemic struck almost a year back, I must have attended, I don't know, maybe about 20, 25 different programs, training programs on, how we need to react to this situation. I have, spent so much of my time with research companies because, I had strategy for a fast-moving consumer goods brand company also in my portfolio of duties. So I think it's the best that I have seen because you very rightly mentioned academia has lost its traction in the world, and now it's all about how we can drive a practical way to run our companies, and one of those ways is scenario planning. And I made up my notes to the companies that I operate. We need to look at this very, very seriously in terms of how we look at the next 1 month, to be very honest. As you know, in Sri Lanka, we are going through a pandemic. We were supposed to open up on the 14th, which is tomorrow, but we have almost 62 people dying, and we have about 2,800 a day coming into with the virus. So now the government has taken a decision to move it to up to another 7 more days, up to 21. And it's very strange, but India also went for a lockdown at the similar times, and they've been able to contain the virus and open up the economy, while for whatever reasons we have failed on that, and now we need to actually understand what we need to do. So in effect, actually Sri Lanka should do scenario planning. That is what we need to do, which is actually what I'm going to discuss with the panel, because the panel members are very senior people. Dr. Anil is in heads academia, sits on so many government boards in the Ministry of Education and Higher Education. In fact, he goes for accreditation and quality certification to most universities in the country. So he's a very, very senior person, graduate of AIT. And then, of course, Dr. Roger, we have Nayana, who has been a very strong leader in the chambers. He has been president of the Young Chambers Association, which actually drives all the Sri Lankan companies into the global market. And of course, he runs one of the most successful companies in Sri Lanka, in Epic. And of course, he sits in many policymaking task force also. So we have two very experienced people who will give their view of a very contemporary topic like what you just now shared on scenario planning. So before that, can I invite Rajiv to share a video on AIT? Rajiv?
Here in AIT, the environment is truly international and multicultural, as people who work, study, and live here come from more than 30 countries across Asia and other continents.
The best management schools in the world are based on a strong industry involvement with leaders coming from around the world. It's also a place where a culture of innovation is encouraged. At our School of Management, that is the culture we're trying to encourage, with regular interaction with organisations and business schools, where teaching staff and faculty come from around the world. No idea is discarded, and a multidisciplinary approach where collaboration with other schools is supported.
Social impact permeates our research and our education. We're injecting more innovation and multidisciplinary thinking in our research. We're engaging in more collaboration with globally prestigious universities, including dual degree programs. Our graduates will be well prepared and have vast opportunities to pursue their passion for social impact by continuing in academia worldwide, or joining local or multinational companies, or working for socially focused NGOs, or becoming government officials, or starting their own businesses.
Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, Ranul, for that work you have done at the back end. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Sanjeev Jayasinghe, a Sri Lankan who sits at the President's office of AIT, that is Dr. Eden Woom's office. And he's been at AIT, I think, for about 29 years. So it gives confidence how a Sri Lankan also supports the system of AIT, one of the top universities globally, I would say. And I mean, every single company person in Sri Lanka, I know the heads of productions and in business have gone to AIT for some kind of program. I also like to acknowledge the presence of the head of transformation in one of the top banks of Sri Lanka, Chiranti Kure, who is also in today's event. And you know, I'm sure that she would really like this whole area of scenario planning because HNB is driving so much into this whole area of IT and you know, online kind of banking. So great to have such a lovely set of people on this Sunday morning. And can we move to the panel discussion, ladies? Sorry, gentlemen, please. Anil is there. Hi, Naina. Great. So,
Yeah.
okay, I will start. I will start with Naina. Naina, what do you think of this concept of scenario planning that Dr. Roger so fantastically explained? I know that right now yours and Dr. Anil's and mine, my heart is in the video that we saw of AIT, and you know how we could again go back there for some time. But Nana, over to you. You'll have to unmute, Naina. Yeah, done.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Of course, you know, for the beautiful and fantastic presentation by Dr. Roger, Professor Roger, because you know, the scenario planning is, I think, more applicable, more relevant today more than in the past, actually. Now, if you had actually looked at what has happened over the past 1.5 years in the world, in the global scenario, right? And then we have now learned certain lessons from this unpredictable, the pandemic, and then crisis situations that we have been basically going through, right? So that actually create the necessity to come up with more and more scenario plannings, because the reliance on long-term planning, the hard and fast planning, which are long-term basis, has become questionable today, right? Because of the uncertainties which we cannot even predict for the next 6 months or 1 year or maybe 2 years. I mean, it's hardly we can do. So one way the most of the organizations are now thinking of basically relying on short-term planning instead of long-term planning, because you cannot predict. We do not know whether the similar kind of pandemic will come in the next 6 months, or the situation is going to be worse, right? So therefore, it's now what the thinking of from the industry is that what is the point of basically relying on having long-term planning and long 5-year, 10-year plans to do that. But in the sense, this scenario planning is more relevant, because now it is, as he said, Elon Musk, in the sense, coming and meeting their strategic teams every month and try to understand what would be the scenario maybe in the next 2 months, maybe next 3 months, or maybe the next 6 months or the 1 year, right? And then you keep on assessing and looking at that scenario every month. So because of the understanding that the environment is basically quite vulnerable now, and then also volatile now. So therefore, we cannot predict the future, and therefore, it is very, very necessary for us to frequently make an assessment of different scenarios that can be basically possible. In that case, what are we going to do if these things happen, and if this trend basically come to play, and then what can we do? So how do we basically ascertain, right, our strategies, and how can we basically change our strategies according to different scenarios? So this is why the scenario planning is actually more relevant to today's business more than in the past. So I think this is a very, very important subject that we all should basically take it up and then discuss positively and try to adopt those practices into all organizations, mainly because the quite tough uncertainties that we have in our markets today. So this is how I see it now.
Thank you, Naina. Anil, you like to share a few thoughts?
Yes, Rand. Thank you very much. It's my indeed, I'm honored to be a part of this important discussion today. By taking this scenario-based or the problem-based like education, the learning, why is it so important in the arena of MBA and DBA? Actually, unprecedentedly, the importance of education is being now discussed in the society. It's due to some other reason. Sometimes like education may be going on at different paths. Even if we just go back to the ancient history, the Plato, so the philosophers also highlighted the importance of education. So there are so many areas, but I would like to summarize with one word. He refers education. So education finally brings the justice, not only the individual justice, but also the social justice. So therefore, these programs like MBA, DBA, which compared to traditional program, maybe other the PhDs or any other, I'm not going to compare it, help us to look at real problems and scenarios that organization face. And not only to find solutions for these problems on your own ways, own passions and any other things, but from a systematic way and different perspective. So whereby actually these different perspectives are enhanced through philosophical view, because in finding a solution to a present day's problem, no matter whether it is scenario based or real life or any other situation, so it really matters at the end of the day how it happens, why it happens. Unless you find all those root causes, how it happens, why it happens, and the solutions that we give may be partial. It will not bring the justice, as I mentioned earlier. So therefore, DBA programs, MBA programs nowadays, like have been, especially I know with my experience from AIT, how AIT really crafts all those things, especially when it comes to this research, problem-based research, scenario-based research. So they are crafted in such a manner to bring solution from a very pragmatic viewpoint, practical viewpoint, and philosophical viewpoint, because then only you would be able to bring solution to the society in a long-lasting manner, in a, by maintaining the virtue of education, because that is pretty much needed at present days, as Naina also highlighted. So we are facing so many problems. So most of the things are unpredictable nowadays. So at the same time, this competition and technology also alters everything in a swift nowadays, in addition to, because the pandemic has become like, in a way, that was an unexpected situation. Even without pandemic, if you take how the world is moving towards, especially the corporations' engagement in the production and reproduction of wealth and knowledge in the society, the technology really alters everything in swift. So therefore, scenario-based education and these DB, or the research-based and the problem-based solving really are going to hold a key for the success, not only for the businesses, but also for the society.
Actually, Anil, what you said is spot on, because even Kantar research says that Kantar is one of the top market research agencies, Roger. They came out and said that people have gone back during the pandemic because they are locked down. They're thinking of going to traditional ways of doing things. They're asking, what is my purpose in life? You know, they have time to think about it, and they have gone back to education. So this is two key insights that came out from the Kantar research. So like when it comes to FMCG goods, people have stopped applying creams, and they've gone back to traditional things like applying oil on their face, you know, to have natural moisturizing happening. People have spent a lot of time trying to read new things, learn new things, new ways of operating. So you know, you see a drastic change taking place, which actually what Anil said is so true. That, you know, it helps education to look at the reality, you know, through this whole area of scenario planning. If I just go back to Dr. Nayana, Nana, do you think Sri Lanka as a country requires scenario planning? You're muted, bro.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, of course, definitely. I mean, not only Sri Lanka, right? Scenario planning is needed by anybody in the world, because the global scenario is such that the market has become so vulnerable. Markets have become so unpredictable, and under that circumstances, the scenario planning is very, very important. I think if you can remember, Rohanta, when we used to do our DBA in 2006 or something like that, right? We learned something called visioning and futuring, right? You know, during the DBA program. I mean, you know, even that time, AIT was basically talking about you know, how we can actually look at the future and how to pick up weak signals in the market, right? And then have a pragmatic approach to or ascertain what is going to happen by looking at the weak signals, and then how we basically basically come out with or imagine different scenarios and situations. It may happen in another maybe 6 months or 1 year's time, or maybe 2 years time. So then how we basically plan today for the futuring part, right, in order to basically face and you know, offer solutions to those when those signals become more stronger, right? So even at that time, even AIT was basically thinking on those lines, in the sense, you know, planning for the future. I mean, planning in the future, understanding what is going to happen, and then so and come out with some stories of different scenarios, right? It's basically storytelling, story development kind of these things. So therefore, in today's organization, maybe, in the food and beverage industry or the high tech and, technology domains, or maybe medical and healthcare, the hospitality, or whatever the domain it may be, right? Every business is going to be affected with this volatile, highly volatile and highly unpredictable situations that the businesses will face, right? So therefore, getting ready, because what I always advise to the business community is that today one of the most the important factors for any organization is the agility. Your adaptability, how fast you can adapt to situation, how can you be basically agile, because when a crisis comes, right, it's not recommended you to go head on with the crisis, right? Because crisis is something that you cannot basically control, because that is why we call it is a crisis. Crisis is a crisis, right? So it's rather than just go head on onto the crisis, it is rather better be agile, take a side step, right? Understand, okay, fine, now if this happen, this is going to happen, and these are the opportunities that we can actually, instead of what we are having now, and these are the new opportunities that we can actually pick up in the market, in the niche areas, and then move ahead to that direction, in the sense, or maybe slightly change your trajectory and then go to this one. So the agility, adaptability are the most important capability of an organization for today's organization to survive, right? So under that the circumstances, in the sense, understanding what is going to happen, right? And then what will happen in the next 6 months, 1 year, and things like that, and then come with some assumptions, come with some scenarios, right? And then get ready today to be adaptable or to be agile, right? So all what matters is how we are going to prepare. Preparedness is most important. So that how we basically look at, assess those scenarios, to understand those scenarios, and then we prepare today to face those scenarios when those scenarios actually come into play. So therefore, I think scenario planning is very, very, very important for today's organizations.
You're right, Naina. I'm on a team which runs a 5 billion FMCG company. And when the first lockdown was announced, we lost about almost 20% of business. Now, so we were at that time looking at June. Now, when you lose 20% of business, means that you can't even cover your cost. So you run at a loss virtually in that company. So then we are looking at the next month, that is June. We looked at a scenario like saying, how do we get our product into the market? Because end of the day, the consumers have to brush their teeth. They have to have a bath, whether you like it or not. So the consumption was happening of your product. But then how do you get this product to the retail outlet? And how do you get the product from the retail outlet to the consumer was the biggest challenge. So then we looked at that scenario. So Dr. Roger, unconsciously, we were doing scenario planning, but not to the extent of looking at it as science, like what you explained today. So first is...
Rather, very recently I read an article in McKinsey, right? And what they say is, according to the research, one of the research that they have done, they say that now the organizational employees do not want to go back to the normal, the office environment. They prefer to be at home and then work, right? Now, isn't that a new scenario that we are going to face? The businesses are going to face. Now, this is going to happen. The customer behavior changes, in the sense, is going to happen because of these uncertainties. The scenarios that we are currently going through.
Sure. And actually, you're spot on, Naina. So what we did was, we asked ourselves, okay, we went to the Disapati, and each of the Disapatis said, okay, we will give 6 outlets to be open in every town. So then we made sure that our distributors, rather than going to the retail outlet and asking, all the sales guys had their handheld computer. So they spoke to the retailer, got the order on the handheld, then we quickly uploaded it, and the distributor saw it, and in the night he comes and distributes the product. So the government also, even though they said lockdown, allowed the product to be available so that, the supply chain didn't get affected. Because last time the supply chain got affected, which is why we went to a negative GDP. So this year, the government is trying hard to keep the supply chain going with all the issues, and trying to see, to make sure that the country doesn't go to a negative situation. So I think, Dr. Roger, in one extent, we are doing scenario planning, but we didn't actually, I really didn't understand that actually we were doing scenario planning until you actually brought this whole concept, out today. My question to Dr. Anil is, if I'm sure I mean, since I've headed 3-4 companies, I've chaired institutions of public nature like the Export Development Board and tourism and all that. I see that the most intelligent people in this country are in the public sector, because they're all first class honors graduates. Otherwise, you can't get into the public sector. 99% of them are very, very passionate also in what they do. I mean, I know that personally. They work till 8 o'clock in the night, even with government salaries. Their commitment is unquestionable. A lot of people don't know this. I mean, I'm talking with hands-on experience, the power of the government, I know. But how come the government didn't look at a scenario when the numbers were going up and the people who were dying were increasing? Even 2 days before, they hadn't looked at the scenario, or we didn't look at the scenario as people of the country, that we need a 21-day lockdown. We need to go up to the 21-day. Dr. Anil, since you're very vocal in what you say, university background, you can say what you want. What do you think, sir?
Well, actually, Rohant, to get a very clear idea about what is really happening and why is it happening, actually we need to again do some research, get some more information. But the little knowledge that I have, the experience I gained by associating with all these people and seeing what's really happening, to great extent, actually these decision makings and problem solving happens through intuition, emotions, and based on beliefs, not based on information, not based on facts, and not based on justification. So to great extent, because such a room is also not available daily. So, I mean, in order to do that, you need to have a kind of independence and that kind of situation, but that's not seen. As a result, what happens, you take decision based on emotions and based on your cultural capital that you maintain within your organization, because all these organizations or agents hold that kind of capital, would be symbolic capital, cultural capital, social capital. Based on that, actually all those things entail a kind of power. That power enables them to take decisions emotionally without having any justification. So that is one of the key problems I have seen in this. So how are we going to find a solution? Actually, either we like it or not, we need to open up a kind of democratic platforms for decision making, for problem solving. And we need to bring, I mean, nothing is going to be practical and pragmatic unless we think of a collective solution, because these are individual solutions, even individual solution, highly dogmatic, without having justification. Because we need to really come out from the box and be open-minded and address the issue. So if it is going to be collective and democratically, I mean, the decisions are taken democratically. Democratically means like it is not from the traditional interpretation of the definition of the democracy, like collective efforts. Everyone's voice, I mean, everyone should have a chance to bring up